I think human rights absolutely entrench the view that every single human being is of equal importance. So it's fundamental to civilization, and all the carping about it, I don't know if the people who do that understand what they're objecting to, because a society without a respect for human rights would be a very nasty place for everybody.
The reason is because in growing up I was deprived of information because of communication barriers. And as a result I suffered a lot of persecution and abuse and oppression. I didn't really know how to deal with this. Now, when I discovered human rights, I realized that it contained protection for people like myself and respect for people like me. That's why I'm interested in human rights and I want to learn more about it.
I think that human rights are incredibly important because they throw a spotlight on some of the terrible things that happen to us all around us. It might be an elderly relative in a care home where the staff don't help her to eat. It might be a child down the road who has a disability, and as a result people think she hasn't got the same rights to go and make friends and play with other children. So I think they're a real way of helping us deal with some of those everyday issues and reminding us really that we are all human beings, and as human beings we should all be able to flourish and be ourselves and play a part in the society we find ourselves in.
I believe in human rights because I think if people they know about human rights, and they practice it, then we will solve maybe most of our problems, because we will learn how to respect each other, okay, and how to respect even someone who we are not agree with them, okay, but we respect them.
And what human rights helps us to do is to put a trust back where there was no trust.
I think that there should be more awareness about human rights so that we can look at our situations in terms of our rights, not just our needs.
Human rights are fundamental both to the way public services are delivered in the UK and to the way in which society operates.
I think so much of the perception of human rights is they're about other people elsewhere. And the way to improve that is to try and get positive publicity about what human rights in our own country does, what it achieves, and the fact that it's for all. So if you constantly think it's about other people, you don't realise at some point in your life you may need to access your own rights.
I think what we need to do is to make human rights appear a lot more relevant to people. All they ever hear from the newspapers are the bad stories. They never hear how human rights are used to improve the lives of everyday people, often in very difficult circumstances. But we need to go further, and I think human rights needs to develop into a whole new range of ideas, the ones that touch people in their everyday lives: housing, health, education, the right not to be destitute, the right to a clean environment. And that's where I hope that the debate on the Bill of Rights is heading.
I think that the perception of human rights can be improved in this country by raising awareness among the population on one hand, and on the other hand to raise awareness with the policymakers.
Raising the awareness and the duty of caregivers and practitioners that they have towards everyone, service users included, raising the awareness there so that the culture can begin to change.
We improve the public face of the Human Rights Act and of human rights by telling people what they mean, by explaining to people that these are rights which are available to everybody and not just those who find themselves on the wrong side of the law.
Well, I'm passionate about giving people information about human rights so that they can decide for themselves how they want to use them in everyday life, and I think that's one of the things that's coming up again and again today. But we also need, as somebody said, leadership in this area. Britain's very good at telling other people in other countries to use human rights, to lift people out of poverty, to give prisoners proper rights not to be tortured or treated inhumanely. But our leaders aren't as good at explaining to us that people in this country have human rights too.
By doing what UNICEF are doing and going into schools and explaining to all children from the first stage on what their human rights are, because with that comes the perception that oh, if I have rights, other people have rights too. So you build up a reciprocity immediately. And you don't go in and saying, these are your responsibilities, before you explain what the rights are. That seems to be a brilliant idea.
The perception of human rights can be improved in this country by the media taking a much more proactive approach to it. Human rights has been seen initially as being threatening to the ways of the power relationships, and also within our system of just pinpointing the certain vulnerable groups.
We have to take steps to ensure that older people's capacity to understand and use human rights in their everyday lives is built up. And so I think there's a massive programme of education and training and empowerment that's needed in order to make human rights a reality for some of the most vulnerable groups in our society.
We do have to remind ourselves that we can only really be judged not by how we treat the best behaved people in society, the nicest people in society, but how we treat those people who we see to be the worst behaved and perhaps the less nice people in society.
I would like more people to read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's a beautiful, quite brief document, and both in its language and conception, which is that every single person in the world has basic rights to be respected as a person, to have enough to eat, to have some education, to have their culture respected. They're all obvious things really, but then it imposes a duty on all of us in each of our countries to seek to secure all these rights for all people, and then a general duty on all of us to seek to secure a world run like that. And that's called civilization.
I think a lot can be achieved if everyone knows their human rights from the start, like back in school.
Our children are learning a completely different type of way of citizenship education. And again, they're being taught human rights. And it's incredible to walk in and see 4-year-olds discussing human rights. And it leads to them not bullying each other. It leads to them not ever saying there's an acceptable level of violence of any kind. And later one would hope they wouldn't be homophobic or racist or sexist or sectarian. So when they start at a very early age doing that, it spreads from the child to the schoolyard, to the community, to the home.
I think leadership is the fundamental and important ingredient. And that Barack Obama, within days of becoming elected President of the United States, has already shown us the significance of leadership.
In an ideal world, human rights should exist independently of legal enactment, just as justified moral norms. But unfortunately, that's not the case. But in order to achieve this, or at least start the process, we should try to engage citizens so that people could have control of their lives.
A society where everyone thinks, yes, I live in that kind of country, that quests for that kind of respect for everyone, I think it would make the respect for human rights sort of grow and be a sort of warm flower in everybody's heart, and that's where we need to be.